Hi there, welcome to Comprehensible English Hub. I'm so genuinely excited you've decided to join me today because we're about to explore something that might just change the way you think about learning English forever. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself staring blankly at a page of grammar rules, feeling like your brain is about to short circuit? Or maybe you've spent hours memorizing long lists of vocabulary only to find those words vanish from your mind the moment you actually try to use them in a real conversation? You know that feeling of I know the words, but I just can't say them. It's like trying to assemble flat pack furniture with instructions written in ancient hieroglyphics. Frustrating, right? And honestly, a little bit soul destroying. I've been there. Many of us in the Western world, whether in bustling North American cities or historic European towns, have experienced this traditional, often tedious approach to language learning. We sit in classrooms, we download the apps, we buy the textbooks, and yet fluency feels like a distant dream. You might be nodding along right now thinking, yes, that's me. I understand so much. But speaking is a different beast altogether. But what if I told you there's a secret, a way to learn English that doesn't involve painful memorization or mind-numbing drills? What if you could absorb English naturally, almost effortlessly, just like you learned your first language as a child? Imagine understanding and eventually speaking English with confidence, not because you've crammed rules, but because you've genuinely acquired it. It sounds almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Like finding a unicorn in your backyard. Perhaps one like our wonderfully expressive friend, Breakthrough Master, who you'll see helping us visually today. He's a bit of a language learning magician himself. This isn't a fantasy. This is the power of something called comprehensible input. It's a simple idea with profound implications. We acquire language when we understand messages, when we receive input that is meaningful and just a little bit beyond our current level. Not by consciously learning rules, but by understanding what is being said or read. And today, we're not just going to talk about it. We're going to experience it. We're going on a journey to unlock the secret to learning English without memorization. And I promise it's going to be an adventure. Are you ready to see how this works? Let's start with a story. When I was younger, I decided I wanted to learn Italian. I was captivated by the culture, the food, the music. You know how it is. So I did what everyone does. I bought the grammar, books, the flashcards, the whole 9 yards. My apartment looked like a stationery store had exploded. I spent hours diligently studying verb conjugations. Io parlo, tu parli, egli parla. My brain felt like it was filled with tables and charts. I could, in theory, explain the subjunctive mood to you in excruciating detail. But then I went to Italy for the first time. I was in a small cafe in Florence. The aroma of espresso thick in the air. I wanted to order a simple pastry. I opened my mouth and nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. A jumble of memorized words and half-remembered rules tumbled out, sounding more like a strange incantation than a request for a cornetto. The barista, a kind elderly woman, just smiled patiently. You can almost picture our friend Breakthrough. Master in that moment, can't you? Face-palming perhaps, but sympathetically. It was a classic lost in translation moment, even though the translation was happening, or rather not happening, inside my own head. That was my ordinary world. A world of effort, frustration, and very little real communication. I knew a lot about Italian, but I couldn't use it. Sound familiar? Many English learners I've met from Hamburg to Houston share this exact experience. They have a good grasp of English grammar, a decent vocabulary, but when it comes to a spontaneous conversation, a job interview in English, or even understanding a fast-talking character in a popular American TV show, it's a struggle. The bridge between knowing the pieces and using the whole language seems to be missing. Then came my call to adventure. I stumbled upon the work of Dr. Stephen Krashen and this idea of comprehensible input. The core idea was revolutionary. In its simplicity, we acquire language when we understand messages. It wasn't about studying. It was about understanding. It was about getting input that was interesting, engaging, and just slightly above my current level of understanding, what Krashen calls I+1. Suddenly, language learning wasn't a chore. It was an act of discovery. Think about how a child learns their native language. Do 5-year-olds study grammar charts? Do they make flashcards for mommy, daddy, or more juice? Of course not. They're immersed in a constant stream of language they can understand from context, from gestures, from the world around them. Their parents and caregivers naturally adjust their speech to be comprehensible. You can see Breakthrough Master demonstrating this now, a caregiver speaking to a child using simple language, pointing, and creating understanding. That's comprehensible input in its purest form. So I changed my approach to Italian. I put away the grammar books. Well, mostly. Instead, I started listening to Italian music I loved, trying to catch the gist of the lyrics. I watched Italian. Children's cartoons, simple language, lots of visuals. I found graded readers, stories written with simpler vocabulary and sentence structures. And slowly, almost magically, things started to click. I wasn't trying to learn. I was just enjoying the stories, the music, the content, and the language. It was just happening. This is where the I+1 principle is so crucial. The input needs to be mostly understandable, but with that little bit of +1, a new word here, a slightly more complex sentence there, that gently stretches your understanding. If it's too easy, I+0, you get bored. If it's too hard, I+10, you get frustrated and switch off. Like trying to watch a complex philosophical debate in a language you barely know. But that sweet spot, that I+1, that's where the acquisition happens. Imagine you're climbing a gentle slope, not a sheer cliff face. Breakthrough Master is showing us a climber now, easily moving from one foothold to the next. That's the I+1 journey. Each step is manageable, building on the last. Now you might be thinking, okay, this sounds good in theory. Children learn this way, but I'm an adult. My brain is different. And yes, adult brains are different in some ways, but our fundamental capacity to acquire language through comprehensible input remains incredibly powerful. In fact, as adults, we have some advantages. We have a better understanding of the world. We can use context more effectively, and we can consciously choose engaging input. Let's try a little mental experiment. Imagine you're watching a short silent animation. Our friend Breakthrough Master is acting it out for us right now. In the animation, a character walks up to a fruit stand. The character points to a red round fruit. The vendor smiles, picks up the fruit and says, apple. The character nods, gives the vendor a coin and takes the apple. Then the character points to a long yellow fruit. The vendor says, banana. The character nods, pays, and takes the banana. Even if you never heard the words apple or banana before, would you understand what they mean in this context? Of course you would. The visuals, the actions, the context make the meaning crystal clear. You just acquired 2 new words without any memorization, without any translation into your native language. You understood the message. That's the core of it. One of the biggest threshold guardians, those obstacles on our hero's journey. For adult language learners is the belief that we must consciously learn grammar rules. We've been conditioned by years of traditional schooling to believe that language is a set of rules to be memorized and applied. But think about your own native language. Can you perfectly explain every grammar rule? Probably not, unless you're a linguist. Yet you use the language flawlessly, don't you? You have an intuitive sense of what sounds right. That intuition comes from massive amounts of comprehensible input you've received over your lifetime. Let's look at a common challenge. For many Western learners of English, phrasal verbs. Those tricky 2 or 3 word verbs like give up, look forward to, or put up with. Memorizing lists of these is a nightmare. But what if you encountered them in a story? Imagine reading a simple story. Sarah wanted to learn guitar. It was hard at first. Her fingers hurt. Sometimes she wanted to give up. But her friend Tom always encouraged her. Don't give up, he'd say. You're doing great. Sarah didn't give up. Now she plays beautifully. Did you understand give up? I bet you did. You saw it in context. You saw Sarah's struggle, Tom's encouragement. The meaning became clear through the narrative. You didn't need a dictionary definition. And now, if you hear give up in another context, say someone talking about a difficult project at work in London or a challenging hike in the Rockies, you'll have a much better feel for its meaning. Notice how Breakthrough Master is visually showing Sarah's initial frustration and then her triumphant playing. The emotional arc helps cement the meaning of give up. Here's something else that's genuinely surprising. Studies have shown that error correction, when someone constantly corrects your mistakes when you try to speak, actually does very little to help language acquisition. In fact, it can do the opposite. It can create anxiety, make you hesitant to speak, and raise what Dr. Krashen calls the affective filter. This is like an emotional wall that blocks input from getting in. If you're stressed, anxious, or bored, that wall goes up. But when you're relaxed, engaged, and enjoying the process, the wall comes down and language flows in. Think of Breakthrough Master now, happily absorbing information with a smile versus him looking stressed and the information bouncing off an invisible shield. That's the affective filter in action. So how do we keep that filter down? Through engaging content. Stories, interesting articles, podcasts, movies, conversations about things you genuinely care about. Content that is so compelling, you almost forget you're learning a language. Let's try a little participation prompt. I'm going to tell you a very short story, and it will contain a new, slightly unusual word. I want you to just listen, try to understand the story, and see if you can guess the meaning of the word from the context. Ready? Yesterday, my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, told me he was feeling quite kerfuffled. He said he'd lost his keys, then he couldn't find his glasses, and to top it all off, his cat had climbed a tree and refused to come down. He was rushing around looking a bit stressed and disorganized. He is definitely kerfuffled. So what? Do you think kerfuffled means? Pause for a moment and think. Did you picture Mr. Henderson? Did you feel his mild panic? Kerfuffled means flustered, agitated, or disorganized. You probably got pretty close, didn't you? You understood the message, the feeling, the situation. You didn't need a dictionary. You used the context. That's you acquiring language. And here's a what-if scenario for you. What if your English learning journey felt less like a grueling exam preparation and more like settling down with a captivating novel or your favorite Netflix series? What if instead of dreading your study time, you actually looked forward to it because it was genuinely enjoyable and interesting, like planning your next weekend trip to Paris or a hike in a national park? This isn't just wishful thinking. It's entirely possible when you focus on input you understand and enjoy. Let's talk about repetition, but not the boring kind. In our binge-watching, scroll-heavy Western culture, the idea of repeatedly engaging with the same content can sound, well, a bit dull. But in language acquisition, encountering the same words and structures in different, meaningful contexts is golden. It's not about memorizing the story. It's about letting the language patterns seep in naturally. When you first hear or read a story, like the one about Mr. Henderson, your brain is working hard to understand the plot, the characters, the sequence of events. As Breakthrough Master is showing us with his animated brain, it's firing on all cylinders just to get the basic meaning. But when you encounter those same language patterns again, perhaps in a slightly different story or a conversation, your brain doesn't have to work so hard on the plot. It can dedicate more resources to noticing the nuances of the language, how the words fit together, the rhythm, the flow. This is how those patterns move from being new information to becoming part of your intuitive understanding of English. Think about your favorite song. The first time you heard it, you were probably catching the melody, the overall vibe. But after listening to it 10, 20, 50 times, you know all the words, the pauses, the intonation, even if you never sat down to study the lyrics. You absorb them. Language works the same way. Now for a genuinely surprising moment, something that really was a wow for me. Neuroscientists have discovered that when you understand language in context, your brain processes it in the same areas as it processes real experiences. So when you read or hear a compelling story in English, your brain is, in a way, living that story. If the story is about someone hiking a mountain, your motor cortex, the part of your brain involved in movement, can actually light up. That's incredible. You're not just learning words. You're building neural pathways associated with real-world actions and emotions. This is why storytelling is such a powerful tool for language acquisition. Breakthrough Master is showing a brain scan now. See those areas lighting up? That's your brain on comprehensible input. So how can you put this into practice right now in your everyday life, whether you're in Toronto or Toulouse? First, find input that you find genuinely interesting and is mostly comprehensible. It could be Toru. Graded readers. These are books specifically written for language learners at different levels. Podcasts for learners. Many offer transcripts so you can read along. YouTube channels that focus on storytelling or topics you love spoken in clear English, like this one, Comprehensible. English Hub. TV shows or movies you've already seen in your own language, now watched in English with English subtitles. You already know the plot so you can focus on the language. Here's a practical language pattern you can start using immediately. It's common in both North American and British English for making polite requests or suggestions. How about or what about, followed by a verb in the ing form or a noun. For example, instead of saying let's watch a movie, which is fine, you could say how about watching a movie tonight? Or if you're deciding on dinner, what about pizza for dinner? Or in a work context and say an office in New York. How about scheduling the meeting for Tuesday? Let's see Breakthrough Master demonstrate this. He's with a friend. The whole friend looks bored. Breakthrough Master scratches his chin, then a light bulb appears above his head. He says, or we see a speech bubble. How about going for a walk? The friend smiles. Simple, effective, and very natural. Try it now. Think of something you want to suggest to a friend. Maybe getting coffee. How would you say it using how about? Pause for audience to think. Did you think of how about getting coffee? Or what about coffee? Excellent. You're using it. Here's another one super useful for expressing preferences. Something very common in everyday conversation in, say, London or Vancouver. I'd rather or I prefer to, followed by the base form of the verb. Instead of a simple no, I don't want tea, you could say. I'd rather have coffee if that's okay. Or if someone suggests going to the cinema but you want to stay in, I'd prefer to stay home tonight and watch something on TV. Let's see Breakthrough Master again. Someone offers him tea. He politely shakes his head and again with a visual cue says, I'd rather have water, please. It sounds polite, natural, and clear. Before knowing this, you might have struggled to express a negative preference politely. After, you have a smooth, natural way to do it. That's a mini transformation. The transformation from struggling memorizer to confident comprehender isn't instantaneous, but it's steady and deeply rewarding. It's like the difference between trying to piece together a complex machine with a confusing manual versus intuitively knowing how it works because you've seen it in action, understood its purpose, and interacted with it meaningfully. Thus, language stops being a collection of parts and becomes a living, breathing tool for communication and connection. Remember my disastrous attempt to order a pastry in Florence? Years later, after embracing comprehensible input, I returned. This time, I wasn't thinking about verb conjugations. I'd listened to hours of Italian dialogues, read stories, watched movies. I walked into that same cafe. The same elderly lady was there. I smiled and said in Italian, "Good morning. I like a cappuccino and one of those delicious looking cream pastries, please." We then had a short, simple chat about the weather. It wasn't grammatically perfect, I'm sure, but it was communication. It was connection. The feeling was incredible. A true breakthrough. That's the aha moment we're aiming for with English. And here's a key insight. Meaning first. Always focus on understanding the message. Don't worry about understanding every single word or analyzing every grammatical structure, especially at first. If you get the gist, if you understand the main idea of the story or the conversation, you are acquiring language. The details will fill in over time naturally as you encounter them again and again in different contexts. It's like our friend Breakthrough Master piecing together a puzzle. He doesn't obsess over one piece. He looks at the whole picture and gradually the pieces fit. This approach also frees you from the fear of making mistakes. When the focus is on communication and understanding, mistakes become a natural part of the process, not something to be ashamed of. Think about it. Children make countless mistakes as they learn to speak, but we don't constantly correct them. We respond to their meaning, and they get better and better. We've talked about understanding input, but what about speaking? The amazing thing is that speaking ability emerges naturally after you've had enough comprehensible input. You don't need to force it. There will come a point when you've absorbed so much English that you'll start to produce it, first in small phrases, then in sentences, and eventually in fluent conversation. It happens when you're ready. Trust the process. Let's think about the what, so what, now what of our journey today. What? We've explored the secret to learning English without memorization, comprehensible input. The idea that we acquire language naturally when we understand meaningful messages, just slightly beyond our current level. So what? This changes everything. It means English learning doesn't have to be a frustrating struggle with grammar rules and vocabulary lists. It can be an enjoyable, engaging process of discovery, much like getting lost in a good book or your favorite TV show. It means you can leverage materials and stories relevant to your life in North America or Europe to make learning more effective. It lowers the stress and anxiety often associated with language learning, making acquisition more efficient. As we've seen with Breakthrough Master, when learning is fun and understandable, our brains are wide open. Now what? Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to start seeking out English input that you find genuinely interesting and mostly comprehensible. Immerse yourself in stories, conversations, videos, and readings that captivate you. Focus on understanding the message. Don't worry about perfection. Let your brain do what it does best. Acquire language naturally. Today, we've barely scratched the surface, but I hope I've given you a new perspective, a spark of excitement, and a practical path forward. Remember that feeling of drowning in a sea of vocabulary. What if instead you could feel like you're effortlessly floating, carried along by the current of engaging stories and meaningful communication? That's the promise of learning through comprehensible input. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. I hope this approach transforms not just how you learn English, but how you feel about learning English, moving from struggle to enjoyment, from frustration to fascination. Look for content that makes you lean in, that makes you curious, that makes you laugh. Maybe even featuring our friend Breakthrough Master. Because when you're enjoying the journey, the learning takes care of itself. Until next time, keep listening, keep reading, keep understanding, and keep enjoying your English adventure.